overflow is God's will for you. And I debated what word to use because I could equally say it is God's plan for you. It is God's design for you. It is God's best for you. But particularly in the spirit of, I think, all of the charged religious ideas and baggage that many people have around the phrase God's will. And in the spirit of this teaching today, and especially what I shared in idea number 2, I wanted to use that phrase very intentionally and word it that way, that overflow is God's will for you. Okay? It isn't just the icing on top. It isn't something excessive or greedy. It isn't a nice thing that some people might get lucky enough to experience in their life, but not very many, only a select few. No, I am here to tell you today, and I want every single person really typing this out in a way that personalizes it and owns it and affirms it for you. Overflow is God's will for me. I want to come back to this video again and again and again as it spreads throughout the world. And I want to see person after person affirming. Overflow is God's will for me. Overflow is God's will for me. Overflow is God's will for me. And I will hit that thumbs up or that heart button on every single one of those comments as I am able to, as you claim it with me. Now, to unpack idea number 4, this is what I want to talk about for a few moments today. I have shared with you in the past that there is one miracle, and only one miracle, only one instance, only one story that, to my knowledge, appears in every single ancient spiritual text that we know today as the Gospels. There's only one. And it's, ironically, it's not the story of the birth of Jesus. It's not the story of the resurrection. It's not Jesus making the wine for the wedding, etc. There's only one story that appears in every single book. And it is the feeding of a crowd miraculously through supernatural provision. If you grew up in church, if you have a Sunday school background, you might know this story as the feeding of the 5,000. And I've shared with you before how this is the only miracle story that appears in all the texts. And I'm not going to repeat this. There's an archived teaching on this that you can access on the channel and on the podcast feed if you're curious. It's called From Over Leverage to Overflowing. But I do want to just repeat a small part of it here to remind you that as we learn together in that teaching, what is God's definition of overflow? God's definition of overflow is enough for you, enough for all needs met, enough for desires to be fulfilled, enough to give, enough to save, enough to have leftover, enough to bless the people around you, and still more. And I talked a lot in that teaching about what is God's definition of overflow. But I have to tell you, family, there's a detail in that story that I don't feel like I fully did justice, that I don't feel like we fully got to unpack in that teaching. But I felt really led to do a deep dive on it as I got ready for this one. Because when it comes to the visible manifestation of overflow in that story, we see overflow in the form of baskets. So Jesus does this miracle, and he feeds a crowd, and everybody, the story tells us, eats until they are full, and they had enough, and they were completely satisfied. I love that. Not just bare necessities, not just, it's a disappointing meal, but you're starving, so you're going to accept it and be happy with it. No, wonderful, bountiful provision where there was more than enough for everybody to eat until they were completely full and satisfied. So this miracle happens. And then every single one of the people in Jesus' inner circle gets to leave and go home with a full basket of overflow left over. And there is such a spiritual and a metaphysical significance to this. And I want you to follow this with me for a moment. So I did my research in preparation for this particular episode. And I found out one of these baskets. There's multiple kinds of baskets that would be used for food in ancient times. I don't want to turn this into the History Channel. I don't want to bore you, but there's very specific words being used here. I did my research on all of this. In specifically the feeding of the 5,000, there is a very specific type of basket being referenced. And what we know is that that type of basket could probably hold, get this, anywhere from 60 to 120 meals worth of food. So think about what this means. For every single one of Jesus' disciples who experienced this miracle, think about what this means. Because again, I think we miss the significance and the nuances and the principles that are hidden here as modern readers. See, when I heard this story and I thought about the disciples taking something home, I will admit, my mind always processed it like a to-go box. A box of leftovers, right? The way that you can be at a restaurant and you enjoy a great meal, and then they ask you, would you like me to box this up for you because it was too much, you couldn't finish it all, and then you take home a box of leftovers. Maybe you'll reheat it and have it for lunch the next day, right? I will admit that I always kind of defaulted to hearing this and thinking about a box of leftovers, but I missed this for so long. I think we've got the percentages all wrong, the picture all wrong, the ratio all wrong, because the baskets that they went home with were not just half a meal or a little bit left over. The baskets that they went home with had enough food in them for 60 to 120 meals. In another miracle of provision, the people leave with baskets that go as high as up to 180 meals left over. I don't know that there could be a more obvious, in-your-face, undeniable picture of overflow than that level of abundance. And so for every single person who experienced this miracle, they did get one meal immediately in the moment. But then they got to go home with potentially 100 extra meals. And here's why I bring this up and take my time with this and what I want you to understand about overflow today. And please listen carefully and hear this, because it is completely possible to actually be attempting to call in overflow while still maintaining a just barely enough belief system and paradigm and consciousness, and to not even realize it. And I pray that this speaks to somebody today, and I pray that this shifts somebody today in a permanent way. Hear me on this. It is not God's highest and best for you for the majority of your money to go to necessities, bills, expenses. And then maybe, just maybe, if you do everything right, if you get lucky, or if you have an extremely good month, maybe, just maybe, you end up with a little bit left over in the end. I'm not judging you whatsoever if that is your experience right now. But I am here today with a truth that can lift you higher and change your life and set you free. That is not how it was meant to be. That is not the ideal. That is not God's highest and best for you. And I believe this story illustrates for us very, very, very clearly and undeniably, there's actually supposed to be more overflow in the equation than anything else. In other words, this is what I think the story illustrates. The small part is all needs met. Provision, requirements, expenses. That's the smaller part. The big part, the main part, the large part is the overflow, the more than enough, the everything left over. I pray that I'm articulating this well, and if I'm not, I pray that God can make it make sense better than my words are able to, because this is the divine design. And once I saw this in this story, I couldn't get away from it. One bountiful meal in the moment. 100 meals to take home leftover. And don't get me going about the idea of 100-fold return, family. But do you see illustrated here? The needs were just the beginning. Just the starting point of the story, just the foundation being laid. The needs were just the beginning. The majority of the provision was overflow. And I want to suggest to you today, overflow was not meant to be an afterthought. Overflow was not meant to be a best case scenario only miracle. Overflow was meant to be your continual normal. You know, I will never forget a Silicon Valley founder that I was working with one time was talking to me and just narrating for me how they were setting everything up and structuring everything in their company in the early days. And they told me, Stefan, I wouldn't set anything up that didn't have a built-in win. They said, there must be profit in this picture. There must be a win for everyone involved in this picture. There must be, or I won't move forward. And they basically articulated to me, I'm not willing to wait and see what happens. I'm not just hoping that it all works out and pays off 7 years from now. This has to make sense. There has to be a win for everyone here. I wouldn't set up anything or agree to anything that didn't have a clear win. And I'll say more about that in an upcoming idea, but here is what I felt called to speak over you today, as I believe this understanding of overflow, this paradigm of overflow, this new way to see overflow begins to take root and integrate into every level of your consciousness. Here is what I felt led to speak over you today. The equation is changing in your life. The ratio is changing in your life. The picture is changing in your life, starting right here and right now. And we are normalizing in your consciousness from this day forward. Needs are not the big part. Bills are not the big part. Expenses are not the big part. They are accounted for, they are handled, they are covered, they are paid in full, if not early. They are taken care of and provided for, yes, 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 according to God's supply. But the majority is overflow. And I speak over you today that overflow is not an afterthought anymore. Overflow is not a maybe anymore. Overflow is not an occasional lucky break for you anymore. I invite you to claim it with me today, and somebody needs to quite literally speak it with me, affirm it with me, claim it with me for yourself in the comments. The majority of my money is overflow. The majority of my revenue is overflow. The majority of my receiving is overflow from this day forward. And so it is, and so it is, and so it is. Let me know in the comments if you are claiming it with me right now, because I am convinced, I am certain that you are meant to plan on overflow in every season, in every situation, in every equation. And we will talk more about the equation, like I said, in an upcoming idea, but really breathe this in. You are meant to plan on overflow as the base, as the norm, as the expectation in every season, in every circumstance, in every equation. Now, it's okay to be in a temporary moment where we don't know where it's going to come from, where we're going through something, where we temporarily have a need or something unexpected that we have to deal with. No judgment if you are there. I have been there. It's okay to be in a temporary moment like that. But I really want to take a stand for you, and I really want to encourage you today. Please don't settle for that as your norm. Please don't settle for that long term. Please don't settle for that and just accept that as, well, this is the way life is. I really want you to get practical with this spiritual principle today, especially if you've never done this before, especially if you've never looked at this before. You might want to pause this, or after you finish this episode, to really go through, what do I require on a regular basis for all of my needs to be met, for me to live my life fully and comfortably, and then beyond that, to always have overflow, to always have more than enough and left over, to always have available funds that aren't marked for anything, where I have the freedom and the ability to say yes to anything I choose to, anything I want to, anything that God calls me to in the moment. What do I require for my accounts to look like that and make that possible? What do I require for my life to look like that on a regular basis? Do you know what that takes? Do you know what that number is? Do you know your point of overflow right now? And again, I just want to encourage you. I celebrate every single person that is still watching, still listening, still with me at this point in the teaching. And please don't decide to bail now. Please don't turn me off here, because what I have found to be true is that often the more confronting and uncomfortable an idea is to hear, often it is the case that the more our consciousness is healing and upgrading and transforming in real time, even as we hear, in the very best way. Again, I'll say it is so often true that the more confronting and uncomfortable that an idea is to hear, the more it means our consciousness is healing and upgrading and transforming in the best way as we hear it. And that is what I know is happening for so many people all around the world as they listen today. It's an upgrade, upgrade, upgrade across the board to God's will for you, to your highest and best, to what you were created for, to what you were meant to live in, to how it was always intended to be. I'll share an example here that I know one partner in particular will appreciate, and shout out to you. You know who you are. But last year, I was introduced to these stem cell patches that basically, when you wear them, they activate all of the dormant stem cells in your body. And they, I'm not a scientist. I'm going to butcher this. I can't say it in the most articulate way, no doubt. But from my understanding, they basically get all of the available stem cells that can be working for you in your body, working for you to the maximum degree. Okay, that's the best way that I understand it. Now, here's why I bring this up and what I have experienced wearing these stem cell patches over the past year. When you first put the patch on and it begins to activate all of these cells in your body, right? The thing about stem cells is they don't just have one purpose. They don't just do one thing. They can be used for all kinds of purposes and all kinds of functions and all kinds of ways in your body. And so when you begin to activate these dormant stem cells, and again, I'm explaining it the best way that I understand it at least, these cells immediately go to work wherever they naturally conclude, and I'm not saying the cells are anthropomorphic, but they are very intelligent on a cellular level. There's a biological wisdom to your body, right? And so these cells automatically go to wherever in your body needs them the most. Now, here's why I'm taking the time to try to explain this, even though I'm not a scientist, okay? The kinds of things that a lot of people want to wear these patches and activate these stem cells for are exciting things, glamorous things, sexy things, right? Like collagen production and anti-aging, reverse aging, right? And I'm all for that. I'm all for some good skincare. I'm all for some anti-aging. But it's interesting because a lot of people's best case scenario is, I want the stem cells to give me energy and make me feel great. I want the stem cells to improve my sex life. I want the stem cells to boost my collagen and improve my skin and make me look younger. And there's all these fun and exciting things that people want the stem cells to do. But when you first begin to activate the stem cells, they don't do those things first. They don't start with collagen. They don't start with anti-aging. They don't start with a lot of those things. The stem cells are trained by the body, by our body's innate divine wisdom. They are trained to go to the place in your body that needs help the most. And so what that means is, for most people, when they begin this process, there's a detox period. And it doesn't right away feel like it's giving them energy. It doesn't right away feel like this is so anti-aging. This is changing how my skin looks. For most people, when they begin this process, it feels like a detox. It feels intense. It feels like, what is happening to my body right now? Because the stem cells have to first go to anything that's inflamed, anything that is not correct, any places where some cells are growing that shouldn't be growing, any places where something has started to go wrong because of free radicals, any places in your body that are hurting or struggling and need the extra help. The stem cells are trained to go there first. And I know it took a lot of time to explain that, but I wanted to use this example today because when I share these profound spiritual truths, it really is like we are activating the spiritual stem cells in your divine DNA. I really think the analogy tracks here. I think it's a great picture and explanation and understanding of what's happening. And what I want to acknowledge is, for some of us, there is some healing required. There are some adjustments required. There is some detox required for some of us. And I just want to acknowledge, you might be hearing these ideas today, and it feels like a far cry from your belief system. It feels like a far cry from your reality and your circumstances and your accounts in this moment. There are people listening today, and you can feel the massive gap between the consciousness that I am sharing from and the consciousness that you live in. And that is okay. And that is not by accident. And that is why you're here. And I want to invite you and encourage you to let the stem cells go to work. And if you have to move through some contradiction, if you have to move through some transition, if you have to move through some detox, that's okay. But don't think that it won't work for you. Don't think that you're too far gone. Don't think that something is wrong with you and you're not doing it right and you can't have it. Please understand, the stem cells, spiritually speaking, are going to work right now for every single person who is hearing this message of truth. And they're doing their job. They're transforming you. They're healing you. They're upgrading you in any way that is needed. And so let them do their job. Let them go to work. I felt led to say before we move on, let the divine promises go to work for you today. Activating all of your inner knowing, your divine DNA, your spiritual stem cells that know that they are wired for wealth and abundance and prosperity. They are connected to how loved you are. They are connected to your real identity. They are connected to the fullness of your divine inheritance. Let them go to work.